On today's Prophecy in the News, we're going to discuss demon seed. And to introduce the program, you've heard it in the news, you've perhaps seen it on television or read about it in the newspapers or magazines, the Flavor Saver tomato. The thing that is different about this tomato is that it is the product of biotechnology. Taking the part of a DNA strand and reversing it and putting it back into the code of life, changing the structure of the tomato. Now the question is, will this be a boom to mankind, or have the scientists opened a Pandora's box? To discuss biotechnology with me today, Gary Stearman is here. Gary, this is a fascinating possibility, but this really goes back to manipulating what God originally created, doesn't it?
God's creation was perfect, and in a moment we're going to discuss the creation and fall. But to begin with, all living things, JR, are made up of deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA it's commonly called. And the structure of this substance is a spiral. It's called a double helix. It has two strands that are connected by ladder-like bars, and only 4 substances make up the double helix. There's adenine, cytosine, guanine, and thymine. Now these are just amino acids. And the trick to creating life is that you have to connect these together in long chains that are hundreds and thousands and millions of characters long. It's a lot like a computer program that has, of course, you know, being familiar with computers, that computer programs are made up of zeros and ones.
Yes.
You connect them in the right order, and you get a marvelous, beautiful computer program. The human body, animal bodies, are made up of DNA, which has 4 ingredients, A, C, G, T, and so when those are encoded in long sequences, A, G, C, T, C, D, A, G, A, C, on for hundreds of thousands of links, and even millions of links, then you get what's called the DNA chain. When God originally created the living creatures, He created a compatible structure. In other words, He made an environment, He made trees, He made land animals, sea animals, and finally man, so that they would all link together and be in harmony, and it was a perfect creation.
And all things living are made of this chain of life,
That's right.
This DNA structure. God made everything perfect, but what happened in the fall? Is it possible that this DNA strand here records the fall?
JR, I believe it is, and scientists have pointed out, researchers, by the way, research has been going on since 1944, and DNA was finally identified in 1953, and since then there's been a mad rush, literally, to unlock the code of life, because think about it. If you can totally decode human DNA, and write it down in a book, which they're doing right now, by the way, all on computers. They haven't completed the project yet, but scientists are madly working to do this. If you can decode human DNA, for example, theoretically you could build a human cell. In other words, there's the idea of creation. There's a lust to create life. Now, in their researches, and this comes back to what you were saying a moment ago, scientists have looked at DNA and they have said, owing to the way these 4 amino acids link together, they didn't always link in the way they're presently found. At one point they must have linked in a different way, and scientists say there used to be a triple strand rather than a double. And they have theorized about that, and they have wondered what caused the triple strand to break down and become a double DNA strand. And well, that takes us right back to Genesis.
Yeah, and the fall of Adam.
The fall of Adam.
Incredible.
It does.
This DNA code, the code of life, the structure by which the various characteristics are made, is a fascinating subject. But for example, the making of this tomato, and I'd like for you to explain that in just a moment, but I want to quote Michael Gilmore, a microbiologist at the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center, who said, "I'm not sure you can translate what occurs in a test tube to what happens in the field." He says, "Bacteria are very resourceful, and unlikely events turn up with fair frequency." He's suggesting the possibility of opening Pandora's box in this, isn't he?
He is indeed. For example, the method of producing this tomato is to flip the gene in that tomato that causes the fruit to ripen and then to rot, which in nature is what fruit does. Fruit falls off a tree, it ripens, it rots, and becomes nutrition for the seeds that it carries. But when you're shipping a tomato to the market, you don't want it to ripen and rot. You want it to ripen to a point and hold at that point for as long as possible so you can sell it. Well, that's what they've done, except that in order to produce the effect, they had to insert what's called a marker gene into this tomato to establish that their change was indeed made. And the marker gene was the antibiotic kanamycin. This antibiotic then, it becomes part of the new tomato, and it raises the question, what will happen when you ingest kanamycin into your body eating this tomato? What will happen to a bacteria or bacterium that ingests kanamycin? Will it become resistant to the antibiotic, and will this create a whole new strain of antibiotic-resistant bacteria?
Now, you know, there have been programs on television recently about people who have taken so many antibiotics until their system is no longer able to throw off diseases.
And that's precisely the point. People are saying, wait a minute, shouldn't we be asking questions? For example, it's known that we only understand about 25% of the chemical nature of the tomato. But the other 75% is a mystery. And so what gives us the right to tamper with a gene so that we'll have a marketable tomato? Are we walking into a dynamite factory with a loaded shotgun and firing in the dark? That's the question. And brings up a bigger question, and that's why the rush? I'm holding here a news bulletin that was first published in 1992, and it talks about the Bush administration announcing a plan that would fund biotechnology research at 12 federal agencies to the tune of $4 billion in 1993. That's last year. This year, the sum has been bumped up to about $7 billion in biotechnology research. There's a global mad rush to see who can patent the advances in biotechnology, because these will be big money makers as time goes by.
Now, a simple explanation of biotechnology would be tampering with the DNA.
Exactly. But there are problems. Now, let's go to another example.
Well, yeah, milk, for example.
Milk. And you've heard about it. There have been news releases. There's a new milk being produced through biotechnology. A hormone called RBGH, recombinant bovine growth hormone, has been approved by the FDA, and many say it's been rushed through without real testing. As a matter of fact, the same hormone has been banned in Europe. In the United States, it's been rushed through for production. You give this hormone to a milk cow, and the milk cow gives a great deal more milk. Well, why do that? As many of us know, there's no shortage of milk. As a matter of fact, it's the precise opposite. Wisconsin dairy farmers, Michigan dairy farmers, all the beautiful Iowa dairy farmers are being paid not to produce milk because we have a surplus of cheese and milk and butter that's stored in giant government warehouses. So why the push to give RBGH to cattle so that they can make more milk? JR, I believe the motivation is traceable back to the fact that there is a move, and it's a global move, by the way, funded to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. This move is to accustom the mind of Mr. John Q. Public to the presence of recombinantly produced chemical substances. In other words, tampering with the DNA to produce something that is not natural. We are being, shall we say, spoon-fed the idea that this is safe, it's effective, it's part of the brave new world that's just ahead.
Political manipulation of the masses?
Yeah, absolutely.
Brainwashing?
Call it what you will.
To prepare mankind for the monsters of the future?
And maybe,
fascinating.
Yeah, maybe it's not too much to talk about those monsters. But let's begin by going back to Genesis chapter 6. After the fall of man,
well, just before chapter 6, in chapter 4, verse 15, God, after the fall, says to Eve, or in chapter 3 actually, verse 15, I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. Now here, it's talking about a DNA structure, the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman. So there is some kind of genetic encoding here that God is talking about when he refers to the seed of the serpent and the woman.
Now, after the fall, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, Genesis chapter 6, we have a very cryptic fourth verse in Genesis 6. There were giants in the earth in those days. This comes, by the way, from the Hebrew word nephilah, which means to fall. These giants were called Nephilim. There were giants in the earth in those days, and after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bare children unto them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. J.R., the sages of Israel, going back thousands of years, commenting on this verse, said that these are fallen angels that intermarried with human females and produced a gross offspring.
Which means they were not human. The angels were not human.
Right.
But they were able to bear children through human women.
And the children turned out to be monstrosities. And by the way, this is a thousands of years old teaching. This is nothing new. Now, Satan,
there has to be some truth, because it not only appears in the Bible, it appears in other writings as well, in ancient cultures.
We have, for example, I'm looking at a book here that talks about the secret teachings of the ages, and you open this up to ancient Atlantis, and you have creatures of mythology that have, for example, the lower body of a goat, wings like a bird, the upper body perhaps of a bird. Thoth, the Egyptian god of wisdom, who dates back to prehistoric times, literally, has the body of a man and the head of a bird. And if you stop and think about the hundreds of permutations of animal and man, these, I believe, are the mighty men of old, the men of renown, the demigods, the gods, the corrupt creation that became the stuff of mythology. Even Plato, and I've got one of Plato's dialogues here, Plato talks about the creatures of the earth. And here he talks about the lowest class of all, the water creatures. He says the fourth class were the inhabitants of the water. These were made out of the most entirely senseless and ignorant of all, whom the transformers did not think any longer worthy of pure respiration. Who were these transformers that Plato talks about?
Genetic manipulators?
They were genetic manipulators. We would call them fallen angels, J.R. And
in other words, they were not the scientists that wear white smocks and walk the halls of America's universities, but they basically did the same thing.
Exactly, on a much grosser scale. Now, the beautiful side of this is that Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Genesis 6:8. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. He was perfect in his generations, and he had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. They were carried through the flood, and they were a kind of salvage operation in which God said, here's a man and his family whose genetic heritage has not been tampered with. I'm going to take them through the flood and make a new race of man.
In other words, God didn't just get mad at man because he was wicked, decide I'm just going to destroy them all.
That's right.
What it appears God had to do was, get rid of the monsters that had developed by this genetic manipulation?
A corrupt creation had to be destroyed. A crude analogy would be to think of a scientist in the laboratory who started an experiment that went crazy. And it started to produce poisons and gases and horrible things. Well, that scientist is going to take that whole experiment and chuck it. He's going to disable it. And that's maybe a very crude, homely analogy for what happened before the flood. God had to destroy this mutant offspring. This sounds strange if you've never thought about it before, but what's going on here is that Satan has a plan. He wants to destroy that which God has created. And one way to do it is to tamper with the genetic structure of creation. And you know, Paul said the whole creation doth groan together until now. That groaning, I think, is groaning under the weight of a corrupted genetic line.
Now, we have in the book of Genesis the story of demon seed, or the seed of the serpent. This must then be some kind of genetic reference to the future Antichrist. That the Antichrist himself will not just be the product of a man and a woman, but theologians in early days thought that he would actually be the product of demon seed, or that is, just as the Lord Jesus Christ now was virgin born according to Isaiah 7:14, that means he had no human father. So God was not necessarily manipulating the DNA structure there, but was reconstructing the DNA structure to produce the perfect man, Christ.
And the fact is that in Genesis 3:15, we have a pronouncement by God. He says, "And I will put enmity between thee and the woman," speaking of the serpent, "and between thy seed and her seed." So coming down through history, we have a conflict going on here. And we have God's redemptive plan, which is to rescue man from his fall.
Now, Gary, if in the days of before the flood, there was a genetic manipulation by angelic creatures, be they fallen. This is happening again today, since, of course, the 1940s, by scientists themselves.
Absolutely.
Is this the kind of thing Jesus was talking about when he said, "As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be also in the days of the coming of the Son of Man"?
Matthew 24:37.
Then that makes this a sign of the times,
yes,
doesn't it?
It does. I think people have wondered about Matthew 24:37. What are exactly these days of Noah when people were marrying and giving in marriage? It sort of sounds like normal living. Until you go back to Genesis 6 and you see the sons of God coming into the daughters of men, taking wives of whom they chose. That is not normal living. That's a bizarre world.
You know, he just says they were marrying, giving in marriage, eating and drinking. Well, who were they marrying, and what were they eating, and what were they drinking?
Exactly. And with that, this brings me to an article. And here we are in 1994. And here's the headline on this article, which comes from the Philadelphia Inquirer and the Newsday News Service, written by a man by the name of Robert Cook. And the headline on this article, it says, "In the laboratory, scientists creating special pigs to use for human parts." Now, there's a corporation called the DNX Corporation, which is producing what are called transgenic pigs. And I'm quoting, "The pigs are engineered by inserting specific human genes into tiny embryos, then implanting the embryos into surrogate mothers. In some of the piglets, the human genes end up in the animal's germ cells, their sperm and eggs, and later, after cross-breeding experiments, pigs are born with human genes in every cell." And you wonder where this is headed. Well, I'll tell you. DNX Corporation predicts that soon they will have pigs with human blood flowing in their veins. And they say this is a marvelous new breakthrough, because think of we can at last cure the blood shortage. We can manufacture human blood in unlimited quantities.
Incredible.
Isn't that wonderful? You say to yourself, or is it? How about a genetic pig that has a human heart beating within its chest? They're talking about these things. And the pig grows
and the heart now is grown from infancy. The pig was born with his human heart. It wasn't just transplanted into the pig, right?
That is correct.
Born with a human heart.
Because it's been genetically altered, and it comes of age, and the pig is harvested. And the heart is used then for a transplant operation. Someone who needs a heart, they'll have a specifically tailored heart, by the way, which has had its tagging elements removed so that your body won't reject it. It'll be a beautiful heart that'll grow right in your body, and your body will never reject it. And you say to yourself, well, "Why, this is wonderful. Now we have all the transplant organs we need," including, by the way, perhaps ears, noses, Even human faces. Why, you could alter a pig to have a human face. You can produce blood plasma in a pig. But then the question...
That sounds like Hitler's dream.
It does indeed. But there's a question. In fact, there are dozens of questions that nobody's asking. Nobody's asking these questions. Suppose you take the heart from a pig and you have a carcass left. You send it off to the packing house and make sausage out of it. If you eat this sausage, are you a cannibal? Because you're really eating genetically altered swine human flesh. JR, this rings in my mind exactly like the days of old in Genesis 6, when there was a corruption of the line, producing mythological half human, half beast creatures. And this is a direct contravention of God's Levitical system, in which he forbade bestiality, that is the mixing of the genes of humans and animals.
Yes.
This is absolutely breaking God's divine laws. It's happening today in the laboratory, and nobody is asking why, and nobody is saying, wait a minute, shouldn't we examine the morality and the ethics of this?
And surely will bring on the judgment of God.
Surely will.
As it did in the days of old, it will happen again, to be sure. Now, this fascinating DNA structure here, the design, perhaps we can even see that in the book of the Revelation. Listen to Mystery Babylon's description. The beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is. In other words, men will worship this beast, that is, those whose names were not written in the book of life. And we've often thought, Gary, of angels sitting up there writing, in a book, the names of those who were saved. But this is a much neater way for God to record every individual.
Every individual on planet Earth has a code formed of 4 letters, A, C, G, T. And it's billions of characters long.
Like a computer program.
Like a computer program.
Wow.
You have an identity.
Yeah. An identity unlike anybody else.